Es war halt einfach. Man hat es dann gesehen, wie die Anschuss in West, die Geschäfte, die schönen Geschäfte, haben sie alles zusammen gehabt. Da hat nur jemand, da waren die Geschäfte noch offen vorher.
It was one of the last times the Fuhrer would have been seen alive outside of his bunker.
Today, the Hamburg radio announced the death of Adolf Hitler. This report from the enemy has had no official confirmation from allied sources.
She was just a teenager when she was led through 3 SS checkpoints and into Adolf Hitler's private fortress in the Alps. For nearly 80 years, she stayed silent until now. The world is stunned as Elizabeth Kalhammer, the former maid to one of history's most feared men, finally opens up. What she saw inside the Berghof is more disturbing than any official record. Staff who vanished, late-night meetings, angry outbursts from a paranoid dictator. "Before I die, I must speak," she said. And now, at last, we hear the truth from the woman who once cleaned the floors in the heart of the Third Reich. In 1943, a teenage Austrian girl named Elizabeth responded to a simple job ad in the local paper. Maid wanted. Location: the Berghof on the Obersalzberg. She had no idea that taking the job would land her inside Adolf Hitler's private residence. Within days, Elizabeth was led past armed guards and arrived at the Berghof, Hitler's mountain retreat, hidden in secrecy and fear. It didn't take long for her to realize this was no ordinary cleaning job. She had been placed in one of the most restricted and dangerous places in Nazi Germany. The Berghof was more than just a retreat. It was a command post where decisions that changed the course of the war were made. Plans to invade Poland, manage the Eastern Front, and carry out the final solution were all shaped here. While all of Europe burned, Elizabeth Kalhammer polished silver, served tea, and swept the floors, just steps away from the very people orchestrating mass destruction. "I felt sick when I got there," she later recalled. That uneasy feeling stayed with her for the rest of her life, though she kept quiet for decades. Life at the Berghof felt unreal. Tall windows looked out over the Alps. The halls were lined with expensive rugs and paintings, many of them stolen. Everything looked calm and controlled, but fear ran underneath it all. Early on, Kalhammer was warned, "Say nothing about what you see, or you'll disappear like the others." And it wasn't an empty threat. Staff vanished overnight, and questions were never answered. "You're allowed to think," a senior maid once told her, "but never to speak." She wasn't even allowed to look Hitler in the eyes. Even when he wasn't in the room, his presence seemed to press on the walls. His anger, when it came, shook the whole building. But it wasn't just Hitler himself that disturbed her. It was the things said in hushed voices behind closed doors. Elizabeth knew people had to hear the truth, even if it meant risking everything. Elizabeth Kalhammer stayed quiet her whole life, but she never forgot what she saw. Some might wonder why she didn't leave. But we have to remember, she was young, and she likely feared what might happen to her or her family if she tried to run. And like so many others in that time, she was drawn in by fear, confusion, and Hitler's ability to make people believe in his twisted vision. It's easy to understand how a teenage girl could feel trapped in a place like that, a fortress built on fear. The Berghof, sitting high in the Bavarian Alps, looked peaceful from the outside. Rolling green valleys stretched below, and snowy peaks rose above. At first glance, it seemed like an ideal place for a young girl to work. But inside, the pressure never let up. Elizabeth Kalhammer soon discovered that behind the beauty was one of the most tense and dangerous homes in all of Nazi Germany. The Berghof wasn't just where Hitler lived, it was his main base. This is where key war decisions were made and brutal plans were sharpened in complete silence. The whole estate was built to keep things hidden and under control. Every hallway, every room, every single mealtime followed strict rules. Hitler's private study was completely off limits. Meeting room doors stayed shut. Big names like Göring, Himmler, and Goebbels came and went, bringing with them an air of unease. Like the rest of the staff, Kalhammer couldn't ask questions, but they could all hear muffled voices, tense conversations through thick walls. She didn't need to understand the words to know something dark was always going on. No one felt at ease there. Armed guards kept a close eye on every move the staff made. Maids were told to keep their heads down and stay quiet. "Don't ever speak about what you see. Not here, not outside, not ever," a senior housekeeper warned her. That's not advice, it's a warning. Elizabeth noticed a chilling pattern right away. A maid could be working beside her one day, and the next she'd be gone. No reason given. Their belongings would vanish, and their names were never mentioned again. Even asking about them was dangerous. Silence wasn't just expected. It was how you stayed alive. Inside the Berghof, Hitler's paranoia controlled everything. He feared being poisoned, betrayed, or killed. All his food had to be tasted before it reached him. He drank only lukewarm water. His meals were strictly vegetarian and closely supervised. Even the smallest slip, like breaking a piece of fine china, could get you punished. Elizabeth herself lost her time off once for a small mistake. Everything at the Berghof, from the arrival of Nazi leaders to the serving of dinner, was timed perfectly. It was all about creating the feeling that Hitler was in control. But under the surface, everyone was scared. The mountain view, the fancy furniture, the quiet halls, none of it changed what people were really feeling. Fear hung in the air. What disturbed Elizabeth most wasn't just Hitler himself, it was how normal that fear had become. The staff whispered warnings to each other. Conversations would stop the second someone higher up walked in. The Berghof wasn't just Hitler's retreat. It was a mental trap, where no one trusted anyone, and staying silent was the only way to get through each day. To outsiders, the Berghof looked like a peaceful getaway in the mountains. But to Elizabeth Kalhammer and the people who worked behind those doors, it was something else entirely. A place where power and fear stood side by side, and no one, whether a maid or a top official, was safe from its quiet threat. Still, Elizabeth saw something most people didn't. She saw Hitler in his private world, behind the image. And now she's finally telling the truth about what he was really like. The man behind the myth. Elizabeth Kalhammer never spoke to Adolf Hitler directly. No maid ever spoke to him unless they'd worked there for years. But Elizabeth didn't need to speak with Adolf Hitler to understand the kind of man he was. She paid attention. She watched. She listened. And what she saw broke apart the carefully built image of a great leader created by Nazi propaganda. His moods ruled the house. One moment, he'd walk by silently, even politely nodding at the staff. The next, he'd be yelling in a rage over something small, a missing item or a napkin folded the wrong way. Staff said you could feel the shift in the air when he was nearby. You could feel it before he even entered the room, Kalhammer remembered. Hitler never ate meat and insisted on a strict vegetarian diet, supposedly for health reasons, especially related to his spleen. His meals were cooked under tight watch, and everything he ate was first tested by women assigned as food tasters. Still, Elizabeth noticed he didn't always follow his own rules. For all the talk about health, he had a serious sweet tooth. Late at night, he would sneak into the kitchen for a slice of Führer cake, an apple nut dessert left out just for him, like a little treat for a child. Behind his obsession with food and order was something deeper, a need to control everything. And he wasn't doing it alone. Hitler's personal doctor, Dr. Theodor Morell, gave him a daily cocktail of more than 70 substances. There were barbiturates, stimulants, opiates, even cocaine-based eye drops. These drugs didn't calm him. They made everything worse. His hands shook, his thoughts jumped around, and his angry episodes became more extreme. Kalhammer saw how his entire schedule was shaped by image and control. He often stayed in bed until late afternoon. Mornings were filled with military briefings. In the afternoon, it was all about propaganda, films, speeches, photos. Evenings were for carefully staged social events with movies and quiet music. But even in this tight routine, the fear never left. Hitler believed spies were everywhere. He wouldn't read anything unless it was approved by his closest circle. If a guest made one wrong comment, even something small, they were never invited back. Elizabeth and the other staff learned to move like shadows. They stayed silent, unnoticed, making sure nothing around them would spark another outburst. It wasn't just about doing their jobs, it was about survival. Now, all these years later, Elizabeth Kalhammer has said it plainly. She didn't see a genius or a strong leader. She saw a man falling apart under the weight of his own fear and obsession. A man who gave whispered orders that led to mass death, then tiptoed into the kitchen like a schoolboy. A man who put on a show of strength but couldn't sleep without worrying someone might poison him. This wasn't the version of Hitler found in history books. This was the real one, the one she saw up close, the one hidden behind layers of power, control, and fear. But in Elizabeth's eyes, there was someone else in the Berghof who had just as much influence, though few people saw it at the time. Eva Braun, the quiet power.
Evas Liebling. Stasi. Evas Liebling? Ja,
To the outside world, Eva Braun barely existed. She was rarely photographed, never mentioned in official Nazi news, and left out of Hitler's public image. But inside the Berghof, Elizabeth Kalhammer saw something entirely different, a woman who was always present, always watching, and much more involved than people realized. Eva Braun wasn't just there to keep Hitler company. She helped run the entire household. The staff greeted her with Heil Maid, and she acted as the lady of the house, even though she wasn't married to Hitler at the time. She chose the uniforms for the maids, decided which rooms would be cleaned, and managed all social events. She even personally gave out Christmas presents, once giving the maids wool to knit socks for soldiers at the front. To the staff, she seemed kind and approachable. Elizabeth remembered, Eva Braun was always good to me. She would chat with the younger maids, ask about their families, and offer polite smiles in the hallways. But Elizabeth quickly realized that this kindness had a purpose. It was measured, careful. Everyone understood that anything said to Eva could eventually reach Hitler. She noticed everything, how staff interacted, any change in mood, or anything unusual. And when Hitler's anger reached a boiling point, she would step in, not to defend the staff, but to calm him down. She had a way of redirecting his fury, like someone trained to handle an explosive. But Elizabeth made it clear. Eva Braun wasn't a friend to the staff. Her friendliness was a tactic used to draw people out. Even though Elizabeth personally never had trouble with her, there was always a layer of fear. The staff quickly understood that Eva Braun wasn't trapped in Hitler's world. She chose it. She enjoyed it. While millions starved, she lived in comfort. The jewelry she wore, the silk dresses she showed off, many had belonged to murdered Jewish women. The food she ate was nothing like the rations everyday Germans lived on. She sat in the same rooms as top Nazi leaders, overhearing conversations about war plans and mass killings. She didn't give the orders, but she was there. She knew what was happening, and she said nothing. Elizabeth always remained polite around her, not out of respect, but because Eva Braun wasn't someone you wanted to cross. Eva never held an official role, but her influence couldn't be denied. She was the softer side of Hitler's world, the one who made life at the Berghof seem manageable while shielding the man behind so much destruction. To the outside world, she didn't exist. But inside the Berghof, she was a quiet force. She watched, she listened, and everyone knew it. To Elizabeth Kalhammer, Eva Braun was the perfect symbol of the Berghof itself, warm on the surface, yet loyal to something truly dark. And now, after a lifetime of silence, Elizabeth wants the truth about what happened there to be known. Why Elizabeth Kalhammer stayed silent for decades. Elizabeth Kalhammer never shared the full story of her time at the Berghof, not with her neighbors, not even with close family. The fear that had been planted in her when she was a teenager never left. Speaking out always felt dangerous, even after the war. She'd been warned the very first day she arrived. Sharing anything about life inside Hitler's private home could come with real consequences. "You are here to work, not to talk," a supervisor had told her. That wasn't just a rule, it was a threat, one backed by real examples of staff who disappeared after speaking too freely. She learned early that silence wasn't just expected, it was a way to stay safe. After the war, another feeling settled in: shame. Elizabeth had never been part of the Nazi Party or its crimes. She had no power, no voice in what was happening. But she had worked for Hitler, and in post-war Austria, that fact alone was enough to cause judgment and suspicion. So she tried to move on, live quietly, and keep the past buried. She turned down interviews and never went looking for attention. "I was just a maid," she would say. "I didn't know what was happening outside." But deep down, she knew she had seen things the world needed to understand. Whispers behind closed doors, staff who vanished without a trace, the collapse of a man who had caused so much destruction. One night, Elizabeth overheard raised voices, Goebbels, Himmler, and Hitler arguing in a panic about what was happening in the camps. Still, she kept quiet. It wasn't until she was nearing her 100th birthday that something in her shifted. Looking back on her life, she realized that witnessing something so dark came with a responsibility. "Before I die, I must speak," she told an interviewer. The fear that had once silenced her had faded, but the memories were still sharp. Now, the world is stunned by what she's finally revealed: the final days of the Berghof. By early 1945, everything at the Berghof began to fall apart. The estate, once locked in routine and silence, was crumbling as Allied forces got closer. The mood shifted from pressure to pure panic. Elizabeth Kalhammer watched as the false sense of order gave way. Hitler was increasingly alone. Fewer people visited. The once loud dinners with Nazi leaders stopped. Propaganda meetings were either shorter or skipped. Hitler, who used to obsess over every detail, started pulling away from daily decisions. He didn't trust anyone. The staff saw it clearly. His hands shook, his back was bent, and the speeches that once fired up crowds had turned into long, confused rants. His anger came faster and lasted longer. Any small update from the battlefield could trigger hours of screaming. The maids and servants walked carefully, always afraid of saying the wrong thing. No one wanted to be the one to set him off. Security around the house tightened. Elizabeth remembered the heavy feeling that something awful was coming. Even Eva Braun didn't seem as confident. The rich meals, the movie nights, and the music were gone. In their place were hushed voices, worried glances, and constant rumors. The war, which had always felt far away, was now closing in on them. Then, on April 25, 1945, everything changed. Elizabeth was sweeping the Great Hall when she heard it, an unfamiliar sound, low and steady, like engines. The alarms blared, guards yelled, staff rushed for cover. Elizabeth froze in place. Moments later, the sky above the Alps lit up in fire. U.S. and British bombers had found the Berghof. They knew it was a central Nazi base. Wave after wave of explosions tore through the mountain. The ground shook, walls cracked, windows shattered. The estate that once stood as a symbol of Hitler's power was now burning wreckage. Elizabeth Kalhammer didn't head for the bunkers like others. She didn't follow the crowd. Instead, she turned and ran, straight into the forest, alone. She ran until the sound of destruction faded behind her. And when she finally looked back, the image was burned into her memory forever. The wide windows that once looked out over peaceful alpine views were gone. Flames tore through the rooms where deadly orders had once echoed. The Berghof's polished image had been destroyed in an instant. That moment was the end. Hitler escaped to Berlin. The Third Reich began to collapse. The Berghof, where Elizabeth had spent months surrounded by fear and silence, was no more. She had lived through it all, the fear, the violence, the secrecy. As she stepped out of the woods, she wasn't just a maid anymore. She had become a witness to the fall of one of history's darkest regimes. And from that day forward, she carried the final image of Hitler's world, burning, broken, and finally gone. Secrets revealed, what historians missed. When Elizabeth Kalhammer chose to speak out at 100 years old, even experienced historians were stunned. Her words didn't just confirm what many had long believed, they filled in key missing pieces about life inside Hitler's private world. Her story offered personal, close-up insight into how control and fear worked not just in battlefields or camps, but right inside the walls of the Berghof. One of the most important moments she described happened during a late-night argument between Hitler, Joseph Goebbels, and Heinrich Himmler. Elizabeth couldn't make out every word, but the tone was clear: panic, frustration, and urgency. It was a secret meeting held well past midnight. She wasn't supposed to be nearby, but the voices carried. At the time, she didn't fully understand what she was hearing. Looking back, she realized she had likely been just meters away from a conversation about how to handle the growing crisis in the camps, and how to push the final solution even further. Her memory placed her frighteningly close to one of the darkest planning moments in history. But she also revealed something else: the deep control Hitler had over every detail of his surroundings. He demanded strict routine, filtered every piece of information, and punished even the smallest errors. Kalhammer's account also confirmed long-held suspicions about staff members disappearing. Historians have wondered for years what happened to lower-level personnel in Nazi compounds. She made it clear: vanishings were real, and they happened often. But even after all she saw, Elizabeth shared something surprising. At the time, I was young. I felt lucky to be there to see these important people. I was proud. But that doesn't mean I was proud of the rest. I didn't understand it then. Her words showed just how easy it was for everyday people to be pulled in by the Nazi system. And by finally speaking up, Elizabeth Kalhammer helped fill in the missing pieces of what really happened inside the Berghof. She didn't offer guesses, only what she had seen with her own eyes. Memories held in silence for decades. And through her words, we now see the parts of history that were never recorded in official Nazi documents. Legacy of a witness. Elizabeth Kalhammer never wanted attention. For most of her life, she stayed away from the spotlight, quietly carrying the weight of what she had witnessed at the Berghof. In the beginning, she may have felt proud to be one of the Berghof girls. But over the years, time gave her perspective. By choosing to speak before her death, she became more than a survivor. She became a witness to the private side of one of history's darkest figures. Her story doesn't match what's in textbooks or archives because it's personal. She showed the world a version of Hitler that only someone inside his home could see. Not a leader, but a man who was paranoid, unstable, and increasingly cut off from reality. What makes her legacy so powerful are the details. The slice of Führer cake left out each night like a habit, the hushed warnings shared between workers, the quiet disappearance of anyone who slipped up. The pride she once felt was replaced by confusion and then fear. These aren't just side notes, they're missing pieces historians have searched for. She also exposed the truth about those closest to Hitler. Her account of Eva Braun helped rewrite what we thought we knew. Eva wasn't just watching from the sidelines, she was involved, alert, and part of what kept the system going. Elizabeth saw this clearly, and now, because of her, the world can too. Most of all, Elizabeth Kalhammer reminds us why stories like hers matter, not just for the facts, but for the feeling, the atmosphere, the cost of fear, and how tyranny creeps into everyday life. Her story isn't about drama, it's about truth. It's about someone who stayed silent, not out of agreement, but out of fear. And because at 19, she didn't yet realize the full weight of what she was witnessing. Elizabeth Kalhammer has made sure that the fear, the silence, and the hidden reality of Hitler's world will never be forgotten again. What do you think Elizabeth Kalhammer's story shows us about fear, power, and the hidden truths behind history's most dangerous leaders? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story meaningful, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who cares about learning the truth, no matter how long it takes to come out. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.